What if the reason you're always feeling the squeeze or, why financial crises keep hitting us again and again? What if it isn't just bad policy, but maybe a fundamental flaw in the very design of money itself?
That's a pretty radical thought.
It is, right. Imagine a world where the bedrock of our economic system, this thing we use every single day, money, is built on just 4 core ideas.
Okay.
Yet, for decades, only a distorted view of 2 of those ideas has really dominated how we think, leaving us kind of grappling with these persistent economic problems.
Something's missing.
Exactly. Our deep dive today reveals what our sources call a powerful missing piece that could reshape our economic future. We're going to show you that many truths you thought you knew about money might actually be, elaborate fictions. Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your sources and unearth the most critical insights. Today, we're cutting through the confusion surrounding monetary theories.
It's a complex area.
It is, but our mission is to help you understand how economists have historically viewed money and maybe uncover a perspective that was almost lost to history.
And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is how intertwined these seemingly abstract theories are with real-world outcomes. We're talking about direct impacts on your financial stability, your job prospects, even the fundamental fairness of our society. This isn't just some academic debate. It's profoundly practical. It really shapes the world you live in.
Definitely. So get ready to maybe question some deeply held beliefs, because we're about to embark on a journey that could fundamentally change how you see money. Okay, let's unpack this. Right. So our sources reveal something pretty remarkable, actually, something that simplifies what often feels overwhelmingly complex.
Which is always helpful in economics.
Totally. Despite the vastness of economic thought, there are ultimately only 4 fundamental monetary theories.
Just 4.
It's just 4. Think of this as the author's grateful harvest from their extensive research, a way to distill centuries of debate into something more manageable, more illuminating.
That simplification is absolutely crucial because, as our sources really emphasize, economics must include money at its core. It has to.
Seems obvious, right?
You'd think. Yet, for too long, economics has struggled to accurately incorporate the real-world role of banks and, importantly, money creation. So this clear classification, these 4 theories, it provides a much-needed framework, helps us understand where we are now, and maybe more importantly, how we got here.
Okay, so let's lay them out. These 4 foundational theories that are going to be our roadmap for this deep dive.
Got it.
First, we have public money theory. This is where money is fundamentally viewed as a public good. Things like roads, clean air, national defense, maybe.
Okay, money as a utility, almost.
Kind of. Yeah. Second, there's the moneyless price and commodity money theory. Now, this is the one that underpins mainstream neoclassical economics. Hugely influential.
The standard stuff.
Right. But, as we'll soon find out, it came with some serious theoretical and, practical cracks. Third, we'll explore the exogenous debt money theory. This is often called the flow approach.
Exogenous meaning coming from outside.
Exactly. This represents the mainstream Keynesian view, and it's probably what many of us were taught in school. It basically says banks just relend existing money. They're intermediaries.
The loanable funds idea.
Precisely. And finally, the 4th one, endogenous debt money theory. This is the stock approach.
Endogenous. So coming from within the system.
You got it. This is a more critical perspective, and our sources argue often suppressed. It argues that banks actually create new money when they make loans, out of nothing, essentially.
Oh, okay. That's a huge difference from the 3rd one.
Massive difference, and that distinction is going to challenge the other theories quite a bit.
What's particularly striking here, looking at the history, is that our sources highlight this academic consensus. It existed from the late 19th century right up until the 1960s.
A consensus on what?
On the idea that loans create deposits. Even American textbooks explicitly stated this, which is a core idea of that endogenous debt money theory we just mentioned.
Wait, so the idea that banks create money wasn't fringe? It was mainstream?
For a long time, yes. Which immediately sets up a really important question for us. If that understanding was once so prevalent, what exactly changed? Why did the exogenous view, the intermediary view, take over? Was it just a natural evolution of ideas or was something made to change? And why? Exactly. That's the puzzle.
That's really intriguing. And it gets even more nuanced when we look at specific economists. Take someone like Irving Fisher, a giant in American economics.
Right. Known for the quantity theory of money, debt deflation.
Yeah. Our sources classify him in both the public money and endogenous debt money camps.
How does that work?
Well, it's not really a contradiction. It reflects his groundbreaking insights, but also his evolution. He became a huge advocate for fundamental banking reform, specifically the 100% reserve banking system, which we'll get into. It just underscores that even the most brilliant minds can evolve their views, sometimes quite significantly, as new evidence or understanding emerges. They can challenge their own earlier ideas.
Which is how science should work, I suppose.
Ideally, yes. Okay, so let's start with the first theory our sources lay out. The one they say laid the foundation for modern economics. The mainstream neoclassical theory.
Right. The one that painted this picture of a naturally harmonic and perfectly working market economy.
It's a very elegant vision, isn't it? Almost poetic. This idea of an invisible hand guiding everything to perfect efficiency.
It is elegant. And the cornerstone of this whole theory is the Arrow-Debreu model of general equilibrium.
Arrow-Debreu, okay.
It came out of Leon Walras's earlier work back in the late 19th century. Walras had this idea that the sum of all the budget constraints in an economy, for goods, services, labor, finance, and money markets, they all form this coherent identity. We call it Walras law.
Like everything has to balance out eventually.
Pretty much. A beautifully symmetrical concept on paper.
But here's the kicker, right? Proving that this general equilibrium actually exists mathematically. That was a challenge for economists for what, nearly a century?
A full century. It wasn't until 1954 that Kenneth Arrow and Gerard Debreu finally provided that rigorous mathematical proof.
And our author, Kawuru, actually studied under them.
Yeah, quite an experience, apparently. He studied directly under both Nobel laureates at Berkeley.
Oh.
He paints this picture of Arrow being really active, almost Socratic, always questioning in seminars, while Debreu was quieter, more reflective. Made for a very intense, maybe nerve-wracking atmosphere for the grad students presenting their work.
I can imagine. So they proved it mathematically. What were the big implications of that proof?
Well, this proof, while a huge mathematical achievement, established two profound implications that honestly still influence economic policy today. Sometimes in ways Debreu himself wasn't comfortable with later on.
Okay, what were they?
First, it suggested that equilibrium prices always exist. These are relative prices like how many coffees a cheesecake is worth, where consumers maximize their happiness, producers maximize profit, and resources get allocated efficiently across all markets, like that invisible hand doing its work.
Okay. Makes sense, theoretically.
And second, and this is really crucial for our discussion today, it led to this idea of money as a veil.
A veil.
Yeah, because the money market, according to Walras law, is always brought into equilibrium automatically by the balancing of all the other markets. So money, in this framework, only serves to set the absolute price level.
Meaning?
Meaning it just determines if that cheesecake costs $5 or $10, but it doesn't change the fact that it's worth 1.5 coffees. Money becomes like this veil that has no real effect on the underlying economy, on production, on jobs, on resource allocation.
So changes in the amount of money just cause inflation or deflation, but don't actually help or hurt the real stuff.
That's the core implication. Money neutrality.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting, almost paradoxical. You mentioned Debreu himself had doubts.
He did. After winning the Nobel Memorial Prize in 1983, Debreu flatly stated that his general equilibrium theory was not useful at all for day-to-day economic activities. His words.
Wow, the creator of the theory says it's not practical.
Exactly. Yet, paradoxically, our sources confirm it became a central pillar for market fundamentalism.
Yeah.
This worldview that advocates for minimal government intervention, always referencing Adam Smith's invisible hand.
So the theory's architect dismisses its practical use, but it becomes the bedrock for a massive economic ideology. How does that happen?
That's a great question. This market fundamentalist worldview, despite Debreu's own reservations, it just took incredibly deep root, especially in certain academic circles.
Yeah.
Our sources give this unforgettable anecdote from Kawuru's time as a teaching assistant at Berkeley. He recalled his lecturer confidently asserting in front of over 200 undergrads that Adam Smith was more influential in the West than Jesus Christ.
Whoa, that's quite a statement.
It really captures the almost zealous belief in market forces at the time. And our sources directly link this market fundamentalist perspective, rooted in that general equilibrium model, to contributing factors in major crises like the Great Depression and, more recently, the 2008 financial crisis, suggests a serious disconnect between the elegant math and the messy reality.
So, despite all this mathematical brilliance, our author, Kaoru, started to feel like something was fundamentally wrong.
He did. He saw neoclassical economics as being built on what he called unrealistic abstraction. And in a move that really defined his career and, as we'll see, later came at a significant personal cost, he challenged Debrew's thinking head-on in his PhD dissertation back in 1986.
Challenged a Nobel laureate. Takes guts.
He argued the entire framework was essentially built on a complete fiction.
Strong words. What were these fictions he identified?
He pinpointed 5 theoretical fictions right at the heart of Debrew's big work, Theory of Value. And these weren't just minor details, they were fundamental assumptions that drastically simplified economic reality.
Okay, let's hear them.
First, the theory assumes an economy that is timeless and static. Production takes no time, raw materials just appear. Ignores the whole dynamic, time-dependent nature of how things actually get made and traded.
Right. Reality isn't static.
Second, capital and land are just given as initial endowments. Like they just exist, not accumulated over time through investment or effort.
Convenient.
Third, no classes, no workers, no managers, no distinct class structures with their own interests and power dynamics, a huge abstraction from reality.
Definitely.
Fourth, uniform pricing. Assumes things like rental rates are the same everywhere for similar assets, simplifying away complex market variations.
Okay.
And fifth, most critically for us today, no money. Debrew himself admitted, no theory of money is offered here. The economy works without the help of a good serving as a medium of exchange.
Hey, the foundational theory of modern economics assumes no money.
Explicitly, it assumes a barter-like system where relative prices do all the work.
So what's the takeaway here for you listening? Kaoru concluded that applying these axioms, these fictions, to understand real economic activities leads to serious logical inconsistencies. He basically said the whole general equilibrium framework was a fiction.
And he argued this critique is still relevant even for today's complex computer models, the DSGE models many central banks use.
Which raises that huge question again. How can a theory based on such fundamental fictions have such a powerful and lasting influence on our economy and policies?
Well, the theory itself, this moneyless price theory, it imagines this abstract exchange game. You pick a common measuring stick, a numeraire, let's say cups of coffee again. Everything's priced relative to that. A cheesecake is 1.5 coffees.
Right.
In that purely logical world, money, like actual cash or bank deposits you use to buy things, is literally completely useless for transactions. All exchanges happen magically at these equilibrium relative prices. Information is all you need.
But obviously in the real world, we need actual money. You can't buy groceries with an IOU for coffee.
Exactly. So neoclassical economics, recognizing this glaring gap, tried to bridge it with commodity money theory.
Okay, what's that?
This theory argued that precious metals like gold and silver were naturally chosen as the numeraire because they had intrinsic value.
Right.
They're durable, divisible, hard to fake.
Useful properties.
Right. So they became money because of these inherent qualities. It's interesting. Even Karl Marx in Das Kapital adopted this basic premise. Shows how widespread this thinking was.
So the idea is gold wasn't just arbitrarily picked. It had real value that made it suitable as money.
That was the argument. And this framework strongly supported the idea of the gold standard. Gold's physical properties gave it value, making it a supposedly stable anchor for the monetary system.
And the money neutrality idea fits in here too.
Perfectly. The argument went, if more gold was discovered, maybe gold's relative price compared to other goods might change slightly, but the official dollar price, say $20 an ounce, would stay fixed. So changes in the money supply, linked to gold, wouldn't affect the real economy, just the overall price level.
Reinforcing that non-interventionist stance. Don't mess with the money supply, it won't help, might just cause inflation.
Exactly. It was a powerful justification.
But that critical question remains. How can a system built on these theoretical fictions, like no actual money being needed, and this belief in money neutrality, how did it actually hold up in the real world?
Well, history provides a pretty definitive and, frankly, quite harsh lesson.
Which is?
It couldn't hold up. The gold standard system, the practical application of this commodity money theory that so many influential thinkers lived under and promoted, ultimately collapsed.
Right. We know it ended. How did that play out?
We can trace the collapse through several key moments. It started way back, really. Britain went onto a de facto gold standard in 1717. Sir Isaac Newton, of all people, as master of the mint, set the price.
Newton. Wow.
Yeah, set a quarter ounce of gold at 21 shillings. The U.S. followed much later, 1834, under Andrew Jackson, setting gold at $20.67 an ounce. That price held for a century. Then came the Great Depression. huge bank runs. To try and stop the panic, President Roosevelt raised the gold price to $35 an ounce in 1934. But honestly, the system was already failing globally by then.
Not enough gold or...
Partly that, partly lack of cooperation, economic pressures. Then came Bretton Woods in 1944. Tried to rebuild the international system after the war, fixed the U.S. dollar to gold at $35 an ounce, and other currencies to the dollar.
Making the dollar the world's reserve currency.
Exactly. But here was the fatal flaw. Global economic growth and trade just exploded after the war. The amount of gold being mined couldn't possibly keep pace.
So more and more dollars floating around, but the gold reserves weren't growing as fast?
Precisely. Other countries started accumulating dollars, and they had the right to exchange them for U.S. gold at $35 an ounce. The U.S. gold reserves started draining away.
Uh-oh.
There was an attempt to prop it up the London gold pool in the 60s. Central banks tried to manage the gold price, but it failed. France pulled out in '57, seeing the writing on the wall.
The dam was breaking.
And finally, the Nixon shock. In August 1971, President Nixon went on TV and just unilaterally canceled the dollar's convertibility into gold. Boom, end of the gold standard.
Just like that.
The world shifted to what we call a managed currency system. The dollar stayed dominant, but backed by, well, nothing physical anymore, just trust, essentially. Fiat money.
So bringing this back to you, the listener, what's the real impact of all this history? The collapse wasn't just a news event. It proved that commodity money theory was, as our sources put it, no longer the analytical subject of monetary theory.
It exposed the fundamental flaw. In a real economy, you need actual money, legal tender, and N+1 object beyond just relative prices for transactions to happen smoothly.
And that just doesn't fit the neat, moneyless assumptions of general equilibrium.
Nope. It was a theoretical fiction that crashed against the rocks of reality, finite resources, global growth, national interests.
So to sum up this first deep dive, Neoclassical monetary theory gave us elegant math, the idea of money as a neutral veil, and the gold standard.
But it was based on fictions, and its practical application, the gold standard, ultimately proved unsustainable. Its collapse really marked a major turning point, leaving this vacuum that other theories then rushed to fill.
Which leads us directly to our next theory. Right.
Yeah.
So with the neoclassical view and the gold standard collapsing, a new theory stepped into the mainstream spotlight. This is the exogenous debt money theory.
And this one became widely disseminated. It's probably what's in most standard economics textbooks today, or at least until very recently.
It defines money as exogenous debt money and uses a flow approach. Let's break that down. Exogenous means
coming from outside the private banking system. The idea is the central bank is the primary source.
okay, and flow approach.
This is the core idea. The central bank issues currency, base money. Then, commercial banks act as pure financial intermediaries.
Intermediaries, meaning they just connect savers and borrowers.
Exactly. They collect deposits, which are seen as existing savings from households and firms, and then they lend a portion of those existing funds out to borrowers.
And then this gets multiplied.
Right. Through the reserve system, these initial deposits get multiplied throughout the banking system, leading to a larger overall money supply. But the key is, banks are just channeling funds, not creating them initially.
That's why it's called the flow approach, or the loanable funds theory. The amount banks can lend is limited by the flow of savings coming into the banks.
Correct. The direct implication is banks don't create new money themselves. They just move around what already exists. That's the textbook story.
Is that really how banking works today? Is that how your loan gets made?
That is the crucial question. This theory paints a picture of a very stable, predictable system. The central bank pulls the levers, reserve requirements, interest rates, and controls the money supply. Seems very orderly, almost mechanical.
Yeah, neat and tidy.
But let's look at how the actual system, the debt money system with fractional reserves, really evolved historically. Does the textbook story match the history?
Okay, let's trace that history. Where did modern banking actually come from?
Our sources trace it back to those medieval goldsmiths again.
The guys holding the gold.
Right. Initially, they just took custody of gold for safekeeping, issuing paper deposit certificates in return. These certificates were easier to carry and trade than physical gold, so they started circulating as a form of money, a claim on gold.
Okay, convenient.
But here's the key, transformative insight they stumbled upon, the one that changed finance forever. They realized that not everyone came back to demand their physical gold at the same time. Most people were happy just trading the paper certificates.
Only a fraction needed the actual gold on any given day.
Exactly. So they started taking a calculated risk. They began lending out more banknotes, more claims to gold than they actually had physical gold sitting in their vaults.
Whoa, so they were creating promises beyond their reserves?
Precisely. This was the birth of fractional reserve banking. They were essentially creating new purchasing power out of nothing, simply by extending credit, making a loan entry in their ledger, creating money not backed one-to-one by gold.
That sounds risky, but profitable.
Hugely profitable. And it led to the system we have today. The rush to establish central banks started in Europe in the 1800s, Bank of France, Bank of England, culminated with the Federal Reserve in the U.S. in 1914.
And these central banks took over printing the notes?
Yes, they gained a monopoly on note issuance.
Yeah.
Like the Bank of England after the Peel Banking Act of 1844, they became the sole issuers of physical currency.
Okay.
But, and this is the crucial detail, that the exogenous theory often glosses over the private commercial banks, using these central bank notes as their base money or reserves, then retained, and in fact expanded, their power to create new deposits, credits, out of nothing at interest.
So the central bank prints cash, but private banks create most of the money supply through loans.
That's the argument of the endogenous view, reflecting this historical development. This separation of note issuance by the central bank from deposit creation, digital money essentially, by private banks is how the modern system developed. Our sources argue this allowed private banks to devour unearned income and profits from interest on those loans, fundamentally shaping wealth distribution.
And this system then went global.
Absolutely. Institutions like the Bank for International Settlements, BIS, in Basel, Switzerland, the Central Bank for Central Banks set up in 1930, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, in 1947 after Bretton Woods, things like special drawing rights, SDRs, from the IMF in 1969, all cementing this international system where central banks manage base money, but private banks create credit, especially after the gold standard finally died.
Okay, that's the historical backdrop. Now, connect this back to Keynes and the mainstream theory. This is where it gets really interesting, right? A puzzle.
A huge puzzle. John Maynard Keynes, probably the most influential economist of the 20th century. In his earlier treatise on money, 1930, he initially recognized banks as creators of deposits. He understood their active role.
So he knew the endogenous story.
It seems so. Yet, in his massively influential General Theory, 1936, the book that basically launched macroeconomics as we know it, this vital role of banks in creating money, virtually disappeared. Joseph Schumpeter later pointed this out, expressing suspicion about why this key insight vanished.
Why would it disappear from his most famous work?
Well, our sources argue it wasn't just, simplifying the theory, as Keynes himself kind of suggested in his preface. They argue it was a political necessity.
Political? How so?
Remember, Keynes was deeply involved in the Bretton Woods negotiations in 1944, designing the post-war global monetary system. He was dealing with powerful banking interests, navigating complex international politics.
Okay.
And critically, he knew about alternatives. He had received Henry Simons's memo outlining the Chicago Plan for 100% reserve banking way back in 1933.
We mentioned that earlier. The plan to stop banks creating money.
Exactly. And Irving Fisher, whom Keynes respected and called one of my earliest teachers, actually wrote to Keynes during the Bretton Woods talks, urging him to adopt the 100% reserve plan to prevent future inflation and deflation cycles.
So Keynes was fully aware of this radical reform proposal that challenged the bank's power.
Completely aware. And his reply to Fisher is incredibly revealing. He acknowledged Fisher's influence, but expressed considerable reservations about the 100% money. Why? He explicitly stated he feared it would excite unfavorable comment and opposition.
Politics.
Politics. He believed that, particularly in Britain, they could obtain complete control over the quantity of money by means much less capable of exciting unfavorable comment. He chose the path of least resistance, avoiding a direct confrontation with the banking system.
Wow. Think about the implications for your understanding of economics here. Fisher sees the Chicago Plan, immediately realizes it's the key to actually controlling the money supply, and becomes its champion.
Right, a paradigm shift in his own thinking.
Keynes, meanwhile, acknowledges the issue, but opts for weaker measures because the real solution is too politically explosive. He maintained this, arguably flawed, belief that the money stock could be controlled without radical reform.
And this fundamental misconception, this choice to prioritize political feasibility over systemic accuracy about money creation, Our sources argue it got baked into the core of mainstream economics.
And the consequences.
They argue it has directly contributed to recurring government debt crises, made conventional macroeconomic models like the ISLM framework or modern DSGE models fundamentally flawed because they misrepresent how money works.
Because they assume banks are just intermediaries.
Exactly. The authors state very strongly, a true paradigm shift in economics must begin with a paradigm shift in monetary theory. We have to get money right first.
Our sources don't mince words here. They state plainly that this exogenous debt money theory, the mainstream view, was advanced to camouflage and justify the international banking network and operations of central and private banks. Strong claim. Very. They say it deliberately does not question the fraudulent business scheme of fractional reserve banking, which, they provocatively add, only works through the abuse of public trust, the fundamental moral hazard.
So this mainstream view, the one still in many textbooks, what are its key features according to this critique?
Let's list them. First, the central bank is portrayed mainly as the government's bank, issuing debt money.
Okay.
Second, governments themselves only issue small amounts of coins, supplementary stuff.
All right, loose change.
Third, the belief that the central bank directly controls base money and indirectly controls the total money stock through a stable, predictable money multiplier.
The textbook multiplier effect.
Fourth, and this is crucial, private banks are seen as mere intermediaries of existing savings. There's explicitly no such thing as deposit creation out of nothing.
Directly contradicting the endogenous view and that earlier consensus.
Fifth, governments can fund their spending only through taxes or by borrowing existing money from banks or the public.
Limiting the government's options.
And finally, if government debt piles up, it causes crowding out, sucking up savings that businesses could use, leading to rising interest rates and a potential public finance collapse. Therefore, we need fiscal soundness, usually meaning austerity.
That narrative sounds very familiar.
Extremely familiar. So, for you, the listener, this is critical. Our sources argue this mainstream narrative, taught in universities, influencing politicians and central bankers worldwide, is essentially designed to conceal the reality of how money is created and who benefits most. It's a flow approach that deliberately obscures the more accurate but politically inconvenient stock approach of endogenous money creation.
A camouflage, as they put it.
Exactly. A camouflage that hides a deeper reality we need to understand.
Yeah.
Okay, so as the Great Depression completely shattered those neoclassical ideas of market harmony.
The elegant theories met brutal reality.
Right. This catastrophe opened the door for a more honest, maybe more radical look at how money really worked. Even Joseph Schumpeter was apparently working on an endogenous money theory of business cycles, tying booms and busts to money creation, though he never finished it.
Interesting. But it was that group at the University of Chicago who really pushed it forward.
Exactly. 8 prominent economists there made a crucial breakthrough. They looked at the Depression and concluded the root cause was the endogenous creation and destruction of bank deposits.
The banks creating money on the way up and destroying it on the way down through defaults and calling loans.
Precisely. Amplifying the cycle massively. And their solution was equally direct and radical. 100% reserve banking. The core of the Chicago plan. Take away the bank's ability to create money.
A fundamental challenge to the banking system.
Huge. But here's where the politics got intense, creating immense pressure. Remember, the University of Chicago was founded by John D. Rockefeller, the oil tycoon and banker. It was, and arguably still is, a bastion of market fundamentalism, an ideology that generally defends and advances the banker's interest, according to our sources. So, proposing the Chicago plan
went directly against the interests of the university's founding legacy.
Exactly. Talk about biting the hand that feeds you.
What was the cost for those academics?
It seems pretty stark. Henry Simons, a key proponent of the plan, died tragically young at 46. The cause of death is still debated by some historians, adding a layer of intrigue or suspicion. Yet these founders of the plan, like the influential Frank Knight, they stuck to their guns. They argued that separating money creation from speculative private business, like banking, was actually consistent with true extreme laissez-faire theory.
How so? That sounds counterintuitive.
Their argument was that a stable monetary system, managed publicly, was essential for free markets to function properly.
Right.
Letting private banks control the money supply introduced instability that undermined genuine free enterprise. They saw money creation as a necessary function of the state, not private business. Interesting distinction. So, what happened with the plan politically?
Well, the Chicago Economists secretly presented their plan to President Roosevelt in 1933, right in the middle of the banking crisis, when thousands of banks were failing.
Seems like the perfect time for radical reform.
You'd think. But FDR, who our sources suggest feared the bankers around him, ultimately ignored the plan.
Why? Too radical. Too much opposition.
Probably a mix. Instead, he enacted the Glass-Steagall Act, important legislation separating commercial and investment banking, but our sources call it a watered-down version of what was needed. It regulated banks, but didn't touch their core power to create money.
And Glass-Steagall was later repealed anyway.
Right, by President Clinton in 1999, dismantling many of those post-Depression safeguards. So a critical opportunity for fundamental reform in the 30s was missed.
Now, Irving Fisher comes back into the story here.
He does. One of the greatest American economists. He immediately grasped the importance and validity of the Chicago Plan. He integrated its core ideas into his own debt deflation theory of depressions and published his seminal book, 100% Money.
Which basically provided the full theoretical framework for the plan.
Exactly. It essentially completed the work Schumpeter had started, explaining business cycles through the lens of endogenous debt money creation and proposing the 100% reserve solution.
And he became a major advocate.
A relentless one. In 1939, he co-authored a program for monetary reform with 5 other economists, trying desperately to rally support within the profession.
But then
Global events intervened. World War II broke out. Our sources provocatively suggest America's involvement was partly due to a carefully orchestrated plan to push America and Japan into a direct military confrontation. But regardless of the cause, the war effort completely overshadowed domestic issues like monetary reform. It got pushed aside, forgotten by many.
the timing was just terrible.
Awful. But Fisher, he never gave up. In 1944, he wrote directly to FDR again, reminding him of the plan. He even mentioned support from a congressman named Jerry Voorhees, who was a real champion for monetary reform in Congress.
Voorhees.
Yeah. In 1945, Voorhees introduced a landmark bill, H.R. 3648. It proposed creating a monetary authority of the United States that would be the sole issuer of currency, a direct legislative attempt to enact the Chicago Plan.
Bringing it from academia right into the halls of Congress, that's significant.
Hugely significant.
Yeah.
Fisher ramped up his campaign again. In 1946, he mass-mailed members of the American Economic Association, claiming he had over 1,100 economists approving the 100% reserve plan, trying to show broad support.
And more bad luck.
Tragedy, really. That same year, 1946, Henry Simons died. And then Congressman Voorhees lost his re-election campaign.
To whom?
To a young, ambitious politician named Richard M. Nixon.
Nixon again.
Nixon again. Voorhees' defeat effectively ended the political possibilities for the plan for at least a generation. The window closed. A month before his own death, in 1947, Fisher, apparently writing from his hospital bed, sent a long, passionate letter to President Truman. His last effort, urging legislation to finally sever that link between private bank loans and the nation's money stock. He fought for it right to the very end.
What an incredible, almost tragic story of a suppressed idea.
It really is. But the idea didn't die completely.
No, who picked it up?
Decades later, it found a new champion, Stephen Zarlenga, an independent economic historian who, in his really profound 2002 book, The Lost Science of Money, basically resuscitated Fisher's 100% money and the whole history of public money ideas. He brought this almost forgotten knowledge back into the light.
Lost science of money, okay.
Zarlenga then founded the American Monetary Institute, AMI, back in 1996. And AMI drafted the modern version of the Chicago Plan, calling it the American Monetary Act.
AMA. What were its core proposals?
3 profound points, aiming to fundamentally redesign the system. First, reclaim government control over money issuance, consolidate the Federal Reserve System into the Department of Treasury, restoring what they see as a vital constitutional power.
Taking power back from the Fed and the banks.
Second, abolish private bank money creation. Impose that 100% reserve ratio on demand deposits, turning banks into genuine intermediaries, not money creators.
The original Chicago Plan idea.
Exactly. And third, ensure the government supplies money directly for economic growth and social welfare based on the needs of the economy, not the lending decisions of private banks. Money managed for public benefit, not private profit.
So, how did our author Kaoru get involved with this?
He stumbled upon the AMA after the trauma of the 2008 Lehman shock. He read it, and according to the sources, just instinctively knew it was correct. It was the missing piece he'd been looking for to explain these recurring crises.
And he had the tools to analyze it.
Yes, he used his sophisticated modeling technique, accounting system dynamics, ASD, to build macroeconomic models of what would happen if the EMA were implemented. translating these radical ideas into rigorous testable frameworks.
What did the models show?
The results, which he published around 2010, 2011, were pretty astonishing. They indicated that under the AMA, U.S. government debt could potentially be reduced to zero within about a decade.
Zero. How?
By stopping the creation of money as interest-bearing debt and allowing the government to spend new, debt-free money into circulation as the economy grows. The models also showed deflationary recessions could be easily overcome by direct government monetary action, not just relying on indirect central bank tinkering.
And the side effects: inflation, unemployment.
The models suggested it could be done without raising taxes, without causing unemployment or runaway inflation, and without causing international financial chaos. It seemed almost too good to be true, but the math seemed to hold up. Kaworu even won an award from AMI for his work showing how government debt could be redeemed this way.
So this wasn't just theory anymore. It had quantitative backing. Did it get any political attention?
It did. Zarlenga invited Kaworu to present his findings at a congressional briefing in July 2011 for Congressman Denis Kucinich.
Kucinich, right. He was known for challenging the status quo.
Exactly. Kucinich was impressed and then introduced a modified bill based on this research, the National Emergency Employment Defense Act, or NEED Act, H.R. 2990.
The NEED Act. What did it propose specifically?
It was historic in its scope. It calls for actually introducing United States notes public, debt-free money, to replace the existing Federal Reserve notes, which represent debt, a fundamental change in the nature of our currency.
Wow.
It also proposed reconstituting the Federal Reserve into a national monetary authority, governed by publicly appointed members, making it more accountable. And significantly, it included provisions for direct investment in public infrastructure, using this new public money to create jobs and stimulate real economic growth.
So let's connect this back to you, the listener. What might this have meant? Our sources claim the NEED Act, if passed, would have paid off most of national debts by now. It explicitly aimed to create a full employment economy, retire public debt, and restore the authority of Congress to create and regulate money.
These weren't just vague hopes. They were concrete policy proposals based on that rigorous modeling, offering a drastically different economic path, one that directly tackled the debt and instability issues we discussed.
Okay, so we have a historically grounded theory, revived by Zarlenga, modeled quantitatively by Kaworu, showing incredible potential benefits, and even introduced as legislation in Congress by Kucinich. Why isn't this front page news? Why is it still on the fringes?
Well, here's where the story takes another turn. Our sources reveal a powerful network of opposition.
Opposition from where?
It manifested quite clearly at the 2012 AMI conference. A fierce debate erupted between the AMI proponents of public money and advocates of modern money theory, MMT.
MMT, I've heard of that. How are they different?
Well, MMT, in simple terms, defines money primarily as an IOU that anyone can create. It sees government deficits as less problematic because the government issues the currency. Zarlenga, however, vehemently disagreed. He called the MMT group the all money is debt faction.
Strong words again.
He argued they fundamentally confuse the nature of money by equating all money with debt, and crucially, they ignore the long, important history of public money, which is not debt, like the greenbacks during the U.S. Civil War.
So a definitional fight, but with big implications.
Huge implications. Kaworu apparently tried to mediate using double-entry bookkeeping logic, showing MMT views money as a liability on the government's balance sheet, while public money is equity. But the distinction got lost in the heat of the argument.
And Zarlenga traced this MMT money as debt idea back further.
Yeah, he traced it back to an early 20th century writer named Alfred Mitchell Innes. Coincidentally, or perhaps not, this was right around the time bankers were conspiring behind closed doors at Jekyll Island to establish the Federal Reserve. Zarlenga argued Innes ignored the historical examples of government money and effectively befuddled American minds, confusing the critical difference between money, a final means of payment, and credit, a promise to pay. A confusion that, he argued, serves the interests of debt creators.
Okay, so academic debates, factionalism, but did the opposition get more direct?
It did, for Kaworu personally. Just months after he briefed Congress on the NEED Act research, he found himself critically presented, basically attacked in a report by the influential Club of Rome EU chapter. The report was called Money and Sustainability, 2012.
The Club of Rome. They're a big deal, right? Limits to growth, etc.
Exactly, a major international think tank. And the report listed 5 reasons for not recommending the Chicago Plan, or its modern versions like NEED Act. Reasons like it being politically unfeasible and posing greater risks to financial stability, directly contradicting Cowrey's simulation results.
How did Cowrey react?
He found the criticisms empty and based on sophistry. Basically, weak arguments designed to dismiss the idea without real engagement. He pointed out the irony. All 208 monetary crashes they tracked between 1970 and 2010 happened under the existing debt money system, not the proposed public money system. So where was the real risk?
Good point.
But he was particularly struck, maybe even chilled, by one incredibly frank statement in the report. It said, "Any version of the Chicago plan will be fought to the death by the banking system because it threatens both its power base and its business model."
Fought to the death. That's blunt.
Extremely blunt. Cowrey interpreted it as basically a threatening letter from the international banking network, a stark acknowledgement of the raw power dynamics involved.
And did this threat have consequences?
Devastating ones for Cowrey. In December 2012, just a few months after that Club of Rome report came out, Cowrey was abruptly fired from his full professorship at Doshishi University in Japan.
Fired for his research.
He believes so. An academic assassination, as the Club of Rome report had almost seemed to foretell. Even Congressman Kucinich wrote a letter to the university president, pleading for Doshishi to be a sanctuary of academic freedom and highlighting the global importance of Cowrey's work. But the plea was ignored.
That's shocking. The suppression seems very real.
It gets even more incredible. Here's a truly jaw-dropping anecdote from the sources. Years later, Cowrey had a conversation with Bernard Lietaer, who was the lead author of that very Club of Rome report that criticized his work.
Okay. What did Lietaer say?
Lietaer confessed something remarkable. He told Cowrey that Paul Krugman, MIT PhD, Nobel laureate, arguably one of the most famous economists in the world, had personally warned him, Lietaer. Krugman apparently told him with intense emphasis, never touch the money system, never touch the money system.
Krugman said that. Why?
He warned Lietaer that doing so, challenging the fundamental structure of money creation, would lead to academic suicide. You wouldn't be invited to right places. You could kiss goodbye any chance of winning a Nobel Prize yourself.
Wow. A direct warning from the pinnacle of the profession.
It reveals a profound truth, doesn't it? The opposition isn't just about academic disagreement over theory. It's deeply political. It's about professional survival, access, influence, the power of the status quo. Lietaer even admitted to Cowrey that public money theory had never been refuted academically, but the political implications, the taboo nature of it, made it untouchable for many within the economics establishment.
That explains why the criticisms were often sophistry, as Cowrey put it. They weren't meant to be rigorous, they were meant to maintain the existing power structures.
Precisely.
So what does this all mean for you, listening? Our sources connect these dots, the academic criticisms, the firing, the warnings, to a powerful network of economics establishment. Many figures associated with MIT PhDs, like Paul Samuelson, who wrote the dominant textbook for decades, Krugman, Greg Mankiw, another major textbook author, Ben Bernanke, former Fed chair, even the current Bank of Japan governor, Kazuo Ueda.
A very influential network.
Our sources contend this network has systematically shaped textbooks, trivialized critical insights like Fisher's 100% money, and maintained a narrative that protects the current banking system. They even call the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economics, which is awarded by the Swedish central bank, Riksbank, propagandistic, pointing out that Alfred Nobel's own heirs object to it because it promotes a specific dominant worldview.
Not the impartial science Nobel originally envisioned.
Right. And this network, our sources suggest, meets regularly at places like the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, that's central bank of central banks. They coordinate, ensuring the existing debt money system remains largely unchallenged. This isn't just academic debate, it's about power and control. And it starkly explains why challenging the debt money system can come at such an incredibly high personal and professional cost.
A chilling story, really.
Okay, so after dissecting the elegant but flawed neoclassical ideas, the mainstream Keynesian view with its camouflage, and uncovering the suppressed history of endogenous money and the battle for reform, we're at a critical point.
A point of clarification, almost.
Yeah. Our sources asked a fundamental question. Why do we even have these two seemingly different debt money theories? The exogenous flow approach taught in textbooks and the endogenous stock approach that reflects how banks actually seem to operate. Are they really distinct?
It's a good question. How do they relate?
The answer, derived from Cowrey's extensive ASD macroeconomic modeling, is quite startling. It shows that the exogenous flow and endogenous stock debt money theories describe almost identical behaviors of money stocks in the aggregate.
Wait, they produce similar results.
In the models, yes. Essentially, they are heads and tails of the same coin. Just two different ways looking at the same underlying reality of a fractional reserve banking system. One focuses on the initial injection of base money, the other on the credit creation process. But the overall system behaves largely the same way in the models.
That is a monumental revelation. What does that imply?
It implies that the mainstream Keynesian exogenous debt money theory, the one based on banks as simple intermediaries, the one in all the textbooks, has been proven to be incorrect in its core descriptive assumption about how money gets created.
Because banks do create money when they lend.
Exactly. If banks operate on a fractional reserve basis, they're inherently both intermediaries and creators of new money deposits. The simple loanable funds story is a misleading simplification of the actual mechanism.
Okay, so if that core assumption is wrong,
then consequently, any Keynesian theories and macroeconomic models built on that faulty exogenous money assumption, including the standard ISLM model we all learned, and even many modern DSGE models are fundamentally wrong and must be refuted entirely, according to our sources.
wow, that basically undermines decades of mainstream macroeconomics.
It's a radical conclusion. But it explains, they argue, why monetary and fiscal policies based on these models, including things like quantitative easing, QE, are often all destined to fail in achieving stable growth and full employment. It also helps explain why mainstream models struggle to account for disasters like the Great Depression or Japan's lost 30 years. They're using the wrong map because they misunderstand money.
That means the taboo endogenous debt money theory, the one that got suppressed,
was simply correct all along in its description of the mechanics. It offers a much more accurate lens for viewing our actual economic reality.
So after all this analysis, where does that leave us? How many viable theories are actually left on the table?
According to this analysis, we're really left with only two fundamental, distinct theories that accurately describe our monetary choices. Debt money theory, which is now the unified understanding of how the current system works, incorporating both exogenous base money and endogenous credit creation, and public money theory, the alternative based on 100% reserves and government-issued debt-free money.
So the choice isn't between four theories anymore, but really between two fundamentally different systems.
Exactly. It clarifies the core choice we face about how our money system should be structured. Do we stick with the debt money system, or do we consider the public money alternative?
And our sources argue the current debt money system has inherent problems.
Yes, fundamental system design failures. They use the analogy of a poorly designed airplane. No matter how skilled the pilot, the policymakers, the plane itself is inherently unsafe. Even with wise governments and sensible policies, we can't escape the systemic failures because they are built into the structure of how debt money is created and circulated.
So the problems aren't just bad luck or bad policy, but baked into the cake.
That's the argument. What if the biggest economic challenges you face, the instability, the debt, the inequality, aren't just external shocks, but symptoms of these hidden design flaws in the money system itself?
Okay, let's hear them. What are these critical design failures?
Our sources identify 6 key ones that directly impact your wallet, your job, your future. First, booms and busts. Because virtually all money is created as debt by banks seeking profit, the system has inherent instability. Credit expands rapidly in good times, creating money and fueling booms, and contracts sharply in bad times, destroying money and worsening busts. Inflation-deflation cycles aren't accidents, they're features. The total money stock equals total debts, making the foundation volatile.
So instability is built in.
Second, exponential national debts. Since money is issued as debt that bears compound interest, total debt in the system, including government debt, must grow exponentially just to keep the system functioning and pay the interest. It's a mathematical inevitability, not just a result of political choices, leading towards an unsustainable trajectory.
The debt trap.
Third, an unfair zero-sum game. The process constantly transfers wealth. Because banks create money out of nothing and charge interest on it, there's a built-in transfer of real wealth, equity, from borrowers and producers to the financial sector. Bankers and shareholders benefit disproportionately just from the act of money creation itself.
A structural redistribution upwards.
Fourth, this directly drives income inequality, that widening gap between the 1% and the 99%. Our sources argue it stems directly from this system where unearned income derived from creating fictitious deposits at interest outpaces income earned from actual production of goods and services.
So finance grows faster than the real economy.
Fifth, inflation and diminished wage share. This unfair income distribution, where financial claims grow faster than real output, inherently leads to asset bubbles and eventually consumer price inflation. It systematically makes workers poorer relative to those earning income from financial assets, interclass inequality. Your wages buy less over time.
Eroding purchasing power.
And sixth, uncontrolled devaluation. This built-in inflation and skewed distribution can't be effectively controlled by central banks or governments using current tools. It continuously devalues the currency and, crucially, erodes the life savings of pensioners and anyone holding cash, intergenerational inequality. The future effectively pays for the present's financial engineering.
Those are some deep systemic flaws, and they're not just abstract concepts.
Not at all. Our sources argue these 6 points are the direct root causes of the financial instability, the crushing government debt, the growing inequality that directly affect your wealth, your opportunities, your future prospects. This, they say, is why fundamental reform isn't just desirable, it's desperately needed.
Okay, so if the debt money system has these inherent design flaws, what's the alternative proposed by public money theory? How does it address these issues?
The core idea is that these profound socioeconomic problems can be overcome by transitioning to a public money system. It's about fundamentally redesigning the foundation for stability and equity.
How would it actually work? What are the mechanics?
Here's the blueprint. First, the power to create money would rest solely with the legislative branch, Congress in the U.S., Parliament in the U.K., the Diet in Japan. It becomes a sovereign public function again.
Taking it away from banks and the central bank, effectively.
Right. Second, the executive branch, like the Treasury, still collects taxes and executes the budget passed by the legislature, but crucially, it cannot create money itself. This maintains a vital separation of powers, preventing political use of the printing press.
Okay, checks and balances.
Third, because the legislature issues its own public money, which is like equity, not debt, and the executive spends it, the government does not default on obligations in its own currency. There's no inherent interest burden attached to the money creation itself.
Breaking the debt cycle at the source.
Fourth, new public money is put into circulation only when the growing economy needs it to facilitate transactions and prevent deflation. It's provided to the government as equity, not as an interest-bearing loan from banks or a central bank. Money creation is separated from debt creation.
So, money is created based on economic need, not bank lending decisions.
Fifth, price stability becomes the main goal. The appropriate amount of money in circulation is carefully adjusted through the government's normal budget process, strategic spending, tax adjustments to keep prices stable and maintain purchasing power.
A more direct steering mechanism.
And finally, equitable distribution is fostered. Because money isn't primarily created as debt at interest, excessive unearned income isn't systematically generated. Interest income arises more organically from lending real savings when the economy genuinely grows, creating a positive-sum game rather than a zero-sum transfer from borrowers to lenders.
That sounds like a fundamentally different logic. But who manages this? How do you prevent politicians from just printing money irresponsibly?
That's a critical question. The proposal includes establishing an independent policy committee, maybe called the Public Money Administration, PMA, operating under the direct supervision of the legislature, but insulated from short-term political pressures. Think of something like the judiciary's independence.
So an independent body focused solely on maintaining the right quantity of money for price stability, accountable to the legislature, but operationally independent.
Exactly. Its mandate would be clear, keep prices stable. It wouldn't be setting interest rates or bailing out banks.
What happens to the banks in this system? Do they disappear?
Not at all. And this is fascinating. By imposing that 100% reserve ratio on demand deposits, your checking account, banks would simply lose the ability to create money through lending. They become what the textbooks claim they are now: genuine intermediaries.
Connecting savers and borrowers with existing money.
Precisely. Their loanable funds would come from 3 legitimate sources: their own capital, shareholder equity, time deposits representing actual savings people have committed for a fixed period, and funds repaid from previous loans.
So they'd be lending out real money, not creating new digital entries.
Exactly. Their business model shifts. Their income comes from the interest spread earned from lending real savings, plus fees for financial services, payments, advice, etc. It moves away from profiting by creating debt out of thin air.
How would that change the financial system overall?
The argument is it creates a much more robust and fair system. It incentivizes banks to seek out sound investments in the real productive economy rather than on zero-sum financial speculations, because they're risking real savings, not just conjuring credit.
A different set of incentives.
And interest rates would be genuinely determined by the market supply and demand for real savings, not manipulated by central bank policy, leading to potentially more efficient allocation of capital. The PMA would be focused on the quantity of money for price stability, letting the market determine the price of borrowing, interest rates.
So less central planning of interest rates.
That's the idea. So why should this complex redesign matter to you listening at home? These seem like technical changes, but our sources argue these fundamental shifts in structure lead to massive positive changes in outcomes across the entire economy.
What kind of outcomes are we talking about? How does it compare to the current system?
The shift from debt money to public money promises, according to the research, truly profound changes. In monetary stability, a stable money stock, leading to stable prices. No more endemic cycles of asset bubbles, credit crunches, inflation, or deflation.
Predictability.
In financial stability, no more bank runs because deposits are 100% backed. A truly robust financial system, free from the systemic fragility that causes recurring business cycles, financial crises, booms, and depressions.
Safety.
In employment stability. The system is designed to facilitate full employment, replacing the specter of involuntary unemployment that haunts workers under the current volatile system.
Jobs.
Regarding government debt, no government debt is necessary for monetary operations. Fiscal stability is achievable without the built-in exponential debt accumulation that currently forces austerity or risks crisis.
Fiscal health.
It directly addresses income equality. By removing the systemic bias towards unearned financial income, it promotes more equitable income distribution between those who work and invest productively, rather than the current skew towards financiers.
Fairness.
And finally, sustainability. By removing the system's inherent drive for exponential debt growth, which demands constant, often unsustainable economic expansion, it makes sustainable development and environmental conservation genuinely attainable goals, rather than competing against the financial system's logic.
Long-term viability.
This is the profound promise laid out by public money theory, a vision for an economic system that is inherently stable, inherently fair, and designed to support long-term, sustainable prosperity for everyone, rather than systematically fueling crises and inequality. It's a complete reimagining of our financial foundation.
A radically different picture of what's possible. #hashtag outro.
So we've really journeyed through this battle of economic ideas today, from those, harmonious but ultimately maybe fictional visions of neoclassical theory,
The elegant veil.
to the camouflage realities of mainstream Keynesianism, and finally uncovering the suppressed truth of endogenous money and the really profound promise of public money theory. It's been quite a deep dive.
It has. And our examination seems to reveal that, fundamentally, only two theories truly reflect the real choices we face today. There's debt money theory, our current system, where money is endogenously created primarily by private banks as interest-bearing debt, leading to that inherent instability in those systemic design failures we detailed.
Right.
The system we live in. And then there's public money theory, the alternative, where money is issued by the legislative branch, acting as interest-free equity, and exogenously regulated by an independent authority aiming solely for price stability.
So for you, the listener, the choice seems pretty stark when laid out like that. Which path do you choose to follow? Because as our sources powerfully conclude, that is what the paradigm shift in economics is confronting us all.
Yeah.
It's not just academic anymore.
And maybe ask yourself, what is the greatest economic challenges of our time? This feeling of endless government debt, these devastating financial crises that keep happening, the extreme inequality we see growing. What if they aren't just random policy failures? What if they are actually symptoms of a fundamentally flawed system design? A design we've been taught, implicitly or explicitly, to accept as inevitable, almost like a law of nature.
And what if the solution, or at least a potential solution, has been known, rigorously researched, modeled, and maybe even actively suppressed for almost a century? Just waiting there in the works of people like Fisher, Simons, Zarlenga, Kaoru, waiting for us to finally decide which path we truly want to follow for our collective future.
It suggests the power to change things might be greater than we think if we understand the real mechanics.
This is knowledge that could genuinely change everything. We really encourage you to dig deeper, question the assumptions you've always held about where money comes from, and explore the possibilities of a truly redesigned monetary system. It might be the most important economic conversation we're not having.